The singer's fans still flock here for a glimpse of their idol's refuge. Neverland remains empty and off limits to visitors.
Everything here is Michael Jackson's?
Everything that you'll see.
Michael Jackson left behind so many personal possessions that they have filled 5 warehouses.
After being imprisoned in silence for 17 years, at last Michael Jackson's hidden warehouse was revealed, and what lay within sent shockwaves through Neverland once more. The gates of Neverland Ranch remained closed for years, giving the impression that the estate had been paused in time rather than abandoned. One area in particular, a locked garage and a warehouse created under Michael Jackson's own supervision, remained completely off-limits and generated more curiosity than answers until they were eventually opened after 17 years, at which point expectations leaned toward quiet nostalgia and forgotten relics. However, people's expectations and reality never completely matched. 17 years after Michael Jackson passed away, Neverland Ranch continues to act more like a preserved piece of cultural memory than a piece of real estate. However, in 2024, film crew returned to the grounds to film scenes for a Michael biopic, briefly turning the once sealed estate into a working set and rekindling public interest in Neverland.
One of the things that I discovered is that it was very hard to get a sense of who Michael Jackson was by the end of his life. Because under this siege of accusations and stardom, the real Michael Jackson kind of disappeared.
And 30 years of cars he never wanted to get rid of.
Are these all Michael's cars?
These are some of them.
Some of them?
Some of them.
It is helpful to grasp what Neverland was at its height in order to comprehend the significance of these abandoned buildings. After purchasing the property in 1988, Michael Jackson transformed it into something out of the ordinary. It was a private space designed for emotional escape rather than merely a house or an amusement park. As we walk into the main foyer of the Neverland main home, this was
As we enter the main foyer here in the main house at Neverland, this was a room where Michael Jackson would greet his closest friends, and it was a room filled with artwork. These walls had huge paintings on them, some depicting Michael Jackson in whimsical or magical situations. He also loved all kinds of art. There were statues everywhere. One of the statues that I was told was located right here was of a butler with a tray with cookies on it, so he would welcome people in that way. At the other end of the foyer down here, there was a huge clock, a 2-sided marble clock that was so heavy that workers had to come here to Neverland Ranch and actually reinforce the floor here so that that clock would not fall through to the basement below. We can take a couple of steps down into the main living room. This was filled with couches and chairs and rugs, and in this corner here there was a grand piano. On the top of the grand piano there were dozens of photographs, framed photographs of Michael and his family members and his friends, and they would just line the entire top of the piano.
Over time, enormous sums of money were invested to transform it into a self-contained world complete with rides, a movie theater, a tiny train, and thoughtfully designed gardens that blended fantasy and reality. Everything on the property had a purpose, and even the hidden workspaces, Nanton rooms, storage areas, and service buildings were crucial to maintaining the appearance of that fantastical realm, which includes a sizable kitchen.
Which is a huge kitchen. This is the size of Meredith's kitchen. But this is an eat-in kitchen. He had a round table over there by the window. He would eat breakfast and lunch over there. And then this is the main preparation kitchen area. Of course, he had a lot of people working for him, people who cooked for him. And stepping into Michael Jackson's private master bedroom suite. I just want to show you on the wall a security code panel so that Michael could push this to enter this area, or anyone else who would have access to this area would push this. Michael could find out who was coming to see him. He had one of those security peepholes in the door so he could tell who was knocking or who was delivering something. You step down. Michael Jackson had a 2-story bedroom. This is the main floor of it. This was the sitting area. It had couches and chairs in here.
Neverland required a lot of daily support in order to maintain its remarkable setup. The fantasy world required additional facilities to keep things running as it grew larger. Warehouses and storage buildings were used here. The amusement area's equipment, ride parts, cars, gardening tools, and decorations were stored in different areas of the property, while visitors enjoyed a meticulously crafted experience on the surface. These areas were not intended for public viewing. Since the public hardly ever saw them, they were solely used for practical purposes throughout time. They were also incorporated into the ranch's mystique and folklore.
Extensive tour. Can we cut away of this?
Yeah.
Overall,
That's him as Peter Pan?
yes.
Okay, what do you have here, Karen?
And this is Michael's handwriting.
And how old was he when he wrote this?
He would have been 21.
His personal garage space, where time appeared to stand still in an odd sense, was one of the most fascinating. Inside, Rolls-Royces served as more than just automobiles. They were reminders of a certain time in his life. They were stored with care, hardly handled, and nearly frozen, as though they were anticipating his return.
I wanted to show you something that I thought
She brought us over to
said a
something
lot
that
about
she thought
Michael
represented him
the things
and what he
that
cared about the
important to him.
most.
This is something that speaks to him, his love of kids, and this was a gift to him.
To MJ Love, E.T.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Oh, whole carousel here?
No,
Just this one?
just this.
Clearly, there was a big emphasis on children in Michael's life, and everyone who knew him talks a lot about the fact that Michael loved kids and that he was reliving the childhood that he never had.
This is a diorama that was at Neverland.
A diorama.
Yeah, that was built for him actually by Disney.
Alongside the cars were personal notebooks and private materials that revealed a quieter side of his world. These weren't part of the stage, the performances, or the global image people knew. They were fragments of thought, planning, and everyday reflection, stored away from the spotlight. When the garage was eventually opened, it didn't feel like a typical collection of luxury items. Instead, it felt like stepping into a paused chapter of his life, where everything had been left exactly as it was, holding on to the atmosphere of the person who once moved through it daily.
There's another Rolls Royce.
Yeah, well, there's a few.
Did he drive any of these?
Of a tour itinerary in 1979 that described his mission statement for what he wanted to become.
The document reads, MJ will be my new name. No more Michael Jackson. I want a whole new character, a whole new look. I should be a totally different person.
He talks about that he will need to study and look back on the whole world of entertainment. He really thought about the fact that he needed to change how people perceived him from his days on Motown and as a member of the Jack.
Neverland stays memorable in people's minds not only because of Michael Jackson, but also because it doesn't fit into one clear category. It is not just a home, not just a theme park, not just a memorial, and not just a film set. It is a mix of all these things over time. The hidden storage buildings and unused warehouse areas simply show this complexity. They are not fancy or well-known, and they are rarely seen in public images, but they were important for keeping the estate running. Without these support spaces, the main fantasy experience on the surface would not have been possible.
But these are his socks.
Look at that. I mean, those are his original socks. So these are his shoes.
These are actually shoes that he wore.
And he wore those with the socks.
This is his memories of performing Billie Jean on Motown 25. I got an incredible response, more than I imagined, standing ovation, but still I was disappointed that after the big spin, I didn't stay on my toes long enough. I remember him telling me the story afterwards. He goes, I wasn't on my toes long enough. I said, what do you mean you weren't on your toes long enough? How would anybody know that?
But he knew it.
He knew it.
Michael Jackson's legacy did not end when he died. In many ways, it actually grew. After his death in 2009, instead of fading away, his influence continued to rise in both cultural and financial terms. Even today, he remains one of the highest-earning deceased celebrities in the world, making more money than many living artists through music sales, streaming, tours, and other projects. His name still brings in hundreds of millions of dollars. This ongoing success is especially unusual because it exists alongside a complicated history from when he was alive. By the time he passed away, Michael Jackson was seen not only as a major music icon, but also as a mix of talent, controversy, and global fame all at once. This leaves a lasting question about his estate. How can an artist become even more influential after death?
It's just unbelievable. Michael Jackson sells more tickets dead than most artists do alive.
That is absolutely true. Worldwide box office now is over $300 million. And Michael has almost 60 million Facebook friends. He's the biggest selling artist on iTunes. And he's sold approximately 50 million albums since he passed away.
When the estate took control after his passing, the legal and financial machinery had to move fast. The will itself was structured in a relatively consistent way across multiple versions, a portion allocated to charity, a large share designated for his children, and support for his mother during her lifetime. Executors were appointed to stabilize what was left behind and prevent creditors from dismantling the remaining assets. But even that process was immediately contested. Family disputes, legal challenges, and competing claims began to surface almost instantly, forcing forcing the estate into years of litigation management. What made the situation more complex was the sheer scale of intellectual property involved. This was not just a matter of physical assets or property holdings. It was about music rights, publishing catalogs, and long-term royalty streams that would define the financial future of the estate itself.
I just know the Michael Jackson that I knew was somebody I considered, a very honorable person.
John Branca chooses his words carefully. Another subject he doesn't like to discuss is Michael Jackson's family. Jackson's father and some of his siblings challenged Branca as executor and the validity of Jackson's will, but the California courts upheld the will and Branca's ability to carry out Michael Jackson's wishes.
There was a series of wills, and they were substantively almost identical.
In that 20% went to charity, 40% went to his children, and 40% went to his mother as long as she was alive, and on her death would go to the children. The basic principle never changed.
Never changed. The whole objective of Michael's estate plan is to take care of his mother during her lifetime and to accumulate the principal and the assets.
One of the most important turning points came with the catalog strategy that had been built during Jackson's lifetime. Long before his death, he had invested heavily in music publishing rights, including the legendary ATV catalog that contained a large portion of the Beatles' songwriting library. That acquisition, originally purchased for tens of millions, would later become part of a far larger partnership structure with Sony. Over time, this evolved into one of the most valuable publishing entities in the music industry. The estate's continued ownership stake in that catalog became a cornerstone of its posthumous income. What once looked like a controversial business decision in the 1980s transformed into one of the most important financial foundations supporting his legacy decades later.
Thrive on occasion.
Late in his life, Michael Jackson financed much of his lifestyle by routinely borrowing against his assets. But it wasn't these personal belongings that he used as collateral. Although the copyright value of his own songs was worth well in excess of $100 million, the crown jewel of his investment strategy was his portfolio of other people's songs, especially those of the Beatles.
Tell me about the music catalog, the publishing catalog that you advised Michael to buy.
We started with the Sly and the Family Stone catalog. We bought some rock classics, People Get Ready by Curtis Mayfield, Dion the Belmonts' Runaround Sue, The Wanderer, When a Man Loves a Woman, Great Balls of Fire, Shake, Rattle, and Roll. But then one day I got the call that the Beatles catalog was for sale. It was called ATV Music, and it was as if we had hit the mother lode.
And you paid?
The price was $47.5 million, and we later merged it with Sony's music publishing company to create one of the biggest publishers in the world, Sony ATV Music, that the estate to this day owns 50% of.
And so how much is that worth today?
I wouldn't want to speculate about what it's worth, but
Come on, John. You didn't make all this money in this town without knowing what your investments are worth.
Well, it would be speculation at this point.
It's estimated to be worth like $1 billion.
Michael's half?
Yes.
Well, you never really know what something's worth until you go to sell it. And we are not sellers. We are not going to sell any assets.
But even with valuable assets in place, the estate still had immediate pressure. At the time of Jackson's death, hundreds of millions in debt were tied to his holdings, including borrowing against future music revenue. To prevent collapse, restructuring was unavoidable. One of the most significant moves was the sale and renegotiation of future music rights back into stronger corporate partnerships, particularly with Sony.
It would have been so much bigger back then if him and Tommy weren't beefing.
But why were they beefing? Over him owning half the catalog?
I think there was just like, catalog discrepancies or whatever.
And I mean, you did a bunch of that album.
Yeah.
You did, Unbreakable,
like 6 or 7.
Heartbreaker, Invincible, Privacy, Threatened.
Yeah.
It sells 6 times platinum worldwide, which is huge, but compared to his other albums, it didn't quite hit those heights. It wasn't a thriller.
Yep.
Or an off the wall.
Yep.
Was it a little disappointing for a Michael?
No, because I'm like you. You probably sit down and you do math, right? So when I do math and I say, okay, he had one video and he did 6 million. Yeah. When you look at Thriller, he has 7 videos. So if Michael would have had his fair shake, because you know, they went on not to promote. Like Michael had a vision. Like I was part of it. I remember him saying, "We're gonna come out with this first. We're gonna shoot a short film with Threat, and we're gonna shoot a short film." Yeah, with Unbreakable, and I'm gonna have Biggie because I had the Biggie verse, and I'm gonna have Biggie in the video in a hologram type form. He had all his vision. So when I look at that, I'm like, yo, he didn't get a chance to promote because whatever business wasn't right at that time.
That deal, reported in the hundreds of millions, helped stabilize the estate and create liquidity at a critical moment. It was not just a business transaction, it was a survival mechanism. Without it, the estate risked losing control of core intellectual property that defined Jackson's entire career. Instead, it shifted into a long-term revenue engine designed not to liquidate assets, but to maximize them.
The will named Branca and John McClane, a longtime friend of Michael Jackson, as co-executors. Jackson's crippled image was not the only thing they had to contend with. At first glance, Michael Jackson left more debt than anything.
The day he died, Michael Jackson had about $500 million in debt.
Zach O'Malley Greenberg is a senior editor for Forbes magazine, and he's been covering the estate since Jackson's death.
How much did his lifestyle and his personality have to do with his debt?
He never stopped spending like it was the 1980s. We charted it in Forbes. I mean, he was making 50, 60, 80, over $100 million some of those years, and even into the 90s. But after the first allegations in 1993, he never toured in the U.S. again. He never got another endorsement deal in his lifetime.
The first allegations of child abuse?
In 1993, correct. He became in many ways radioactive to brands and to sorts of companies that would contribute to those massive paydays in the 80s. And the upkeep on a place like Neverland, you know, the spending on antiques and so forth, and the maintenance of his entourage and all of that, you know, it really added up.
Then came the unexpected transformation in public consumption. Shortly after his death, the documentary and concert film This Is It was released, built from rehearsal footage of the tour Jackson was preparing before he died. What was originally intended as behind-the-scenes material became a global box office phenomenon, generating hundreds of millions in revenue. It reintroduced Jackson to audiences in a controlled narrative, still rehearsing, still performing, still at the peak of his technical ability. The emotional weight of the footage turned it into more than a film. It became a cultural reset. Suddenly, the focus shifted away from controversy and toward performance, discipline, and artistic legacy, and that shift had immediate financial consequences, proving that demand for Michael Jackson content had not diminished. It had only paused.
Until you go to sell it, and we are not sellers. We are not going to sell any assets.
At the time of his death, Michael Jackson had borrowed $380 million against the value of the songs he owned, so the estate had to move quickly to avoid losing the songs to creditors. John Branca sold future music rights to Sony for a reported $250 million. It was the biggest record deal in history.
As time passed, something else happened that was less expected: cultural rehabilitation. Brands that once distanced themselves from Jackson began to re-engage with his image. Music licensing increased. Streaming numbers surged. His biggest hits returned to radio rotation in ways that mirrored their original dominance in the 1980s. For many listeners, especially younger audiences, the music existed without the historical context they were born too late to experience firsthand. Instead, they encountered the catalog as timeless pop architecture. Thriller, Billie Jean, Beat It, separate from the headlines that once surrounded them. The estate, intentionally or not, benefited from this separation between art and biography, allowing the work to circulate more freely than at any point in the final years of his life.
With Michael Jackson, once they saw the success of This Is It, and once they saw, you know, Sony investing $250 million for that record deal, you know, then you see Pepsi coming back and doing an endorsement with him. You see Cirque du Soleil coming in and doing the show. You know, I think that those first couple deals proved that Michael Jackson was no longer radioactive.
So death erased all his sins, or even possible sins, or suggestion of sins?
I think his death caused people to remember him as he was in the Thriller years. You started to hear Billie Jean and Beat It and Thriller on the radio all the time. I think that transported people back to the mid-'80s when Michael Jackson was at the peak of his career.
And that is what makes the final picture so unusual. Michael Jackson is not simply remembered as a performer. He is remembered as an ongoing system of cultural production, legal management, and global consumption. His estate functions like a corporation built around a person who is no longer alive, yet still generates unprecedented attention and revenue. The paradox is that the more time passes, the more organized and profitable the legacy becomes, even as the personal story behind it grows more distant and fragmented. In the end, Michael Jackson's life did not conclude with closure. It transitioned into something else entirely, a continuing presence shaped by music, memory, controversy, and industry. And that is why, decades later, the world is still talking about him as if he never really left.
He died in 2009.
He died in 2009, and he made...
It's in 4 years, roughly 4 years.
Over $600 million, and that's more than any single living artist has made over that period of time.
And he's not around to spend any of the money.
Correct.
So, what do you think about Michael Jackson's secret warehouse? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe for more content, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one.